My name is Jeff Morgan. I am from Dallas, Texas. And once again, this upcoming Sunday, this is Grandparents' Day in the United States of America. September the 13th, 2020 is Grandparents' Day. We have a day for mothers called Mother's Day, Father's Day. And right now, we also have a day for grandparents, Grandparents' Day. When you go to churches, oftentimes, churches don't talk a lot about grandparents, and that's a shame because it is a very unbiblical position. If you look biblically speaking, there is a great role for grandparents to play. So for example, as I said in a previous video, Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 9 is the biblical mandate for grandparenting. This goes back to the time of Moses. The second law was being delivered, and God said very specifically, only be careful and watch yourselves closely so that you, as grandparents, do not forget the things that your eyes have seen or let them fade from your heart as long as you live. Teach them to your children and to your children's children. So if you are a believer in Jesus Christ, you have a responsibility to teach your children and your children's children. And if you are a member of a church, that church has a responsibility and a duty to help you fulfill that responsibility and also to equip you to be better at that. So I want to talk about the grandparent ministry. Churches today, 5 reasons why a church should have a grandparent ministry. And we've not heard a whole lot about grandparents ministries. This has only been something that's been coming up maybe in the last 10 years or so that we're talking more and more and more about grandparents. Why? Well, there's over 30 million grandparents in the United States. And by and large, many of the grandparents have more finances, they live longer, they have better health. And, you know, they're not just people that should just be traveling the country and everything like that. You now have a new phase of life, and especially in our society today where family fragmentation is so pervasive, we need to have grandparents. And as Dr. Roma Hanks said, it is my belief that grandparenting is the most important family role of the new century. Now here is a picture of my grandchildren. That is Cruz and Gideon Morgan. Maybe they have a different name right now, I don't know that, but this is from about 6 years ago. When my daughter had these 2 children initially, she was not married. She had 2 children outside of wedlock, and I was babysitting them 4 times a week, often 4 times a week, sometimes 5, sometimes a couple times a week. I was with them all the time. They practically lived at our house. Gideon, the youngest one, Gideon is the one right here. He always had colic. He was the one that would, the only way that he would stop crying would be that if I held him and if I walked with him. If I sat down, he'd start crying. If I was walking with him, he was okay. And then I'd keep him going until he'd fall asleep. I'd bought a swing, put him in the swing. And then I'd try to sit down and get a break because I was so tired at that point. And that's when Cruz would wake up. So it was just a non-stop going on thing there. But you also see here too that this is a picture of me with my grandchildren. This is, this one right here is Cruz and this is Gideon. We spent so much time together. It was incredible. But as I mentioned in the first video, right now I'm a blocked grandparent. I'm a grandparent that my daughter has kicked out of her life and has kicked out of their lives. And it's all based because of a misunderstanding that took place with CPS, Children's Protective Services. Children's Protective Services threw me under the bus for something that they got involved with that they did not need to be involved with. In fact, it was because of my help and the efforts that I took that these 2 children were not taken from my daughter. And yet the way that she rewarded me was by suing me. My ex-wife got up on the stand and then committed perjury, and then my ex-wife's parents did a lot of different things. So this relationship that Cruz and Gideon and I had has been fractured for over 5 years. I've tried to go to my daughter, I've gone to my children, I've got a son and a daughter, there's pastors involved, and the problem is that nobody really cares. So this is a failure on all of their parts. I've done everything that I could to try to reach out. I used to have dreams about Cruz, and I remember the dream when Cruz came running up to me and he said, Grandpa, it was the saddest day of my life when they told me that you died. And I had other dreams where, you know, I thought, okay, in the dream, Gideon no longer remembered me. Gideon took his first steps walking toward me, but Gideon no longer remembered who I was. And then the last dream I had of them, Cruz was looking at me like, yeah, I think I remember you. My daughter pledged to erase my memory from their lives, and this never should have happened. Had it not been for me, my 2 grandchildren would be in a foster care or with another family or something like that, possibly, might be back with them. but I was the one who was there. But anyway, to go back to reasons why your church need to have a grandparent ministry, we need to mobilize grandparents, Christian grandparents. Right now, there are over 30 million Christian grandparents, and each of these grandparents can have an influence. For some, it might only be 1 or 2 grandchildren. Some may have no grandchildren, but others, it may be 5 or 6 grandchildren. Could you imagine if we equipped our grandparents to actually minister and to lead our grandchildren to faith and to equip them in the faith, that they would solidify the teaching of the gospel of Jesus Christ in their lives, that the children, the grandchildren, when they get older, they could go up to the grandparents? Because we all know there are some times that a son or a daughter will not talk to a mother or a father, but they will talk to a grandparent. And a grandparent can provide that type of input. And the churches need to actually be developing this, unless you want to fail the upcoming generation. Unless you want to fail the current grandparents, and if you want to fail the current grandchildren, and the grandchildren yet to be born, churches need to adopt a ministry for grandparents. This has become more and more in focus within the last 10, 12 years. It's with an organization called Legacy Organization, I think Legacy or Legacy Grandparenting. And but they're so excited about this. This is where the action is. We need to equip our grandparents, because grandparents have the time. Many grandparents have the money. Many grandparents have the health. Many grandparents have 20, 30 years to go. They can pour into their grandchildren. We need to mobilize our Christian grandparents to pour into the lives of our grandchildren. Number 2 is this: the Bible tells us to teach our children and our children's children. And as I've mentioned, maybe even here, but in the last video, Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 9 says this: only be careful. Watch yourselves closely so that you do not forget the things that your eyes have seen, or let them fade from your heart. As long as you live, teach them to your children and to your children's children. And if you go in the Bible, and if you look at even Timothy in the New Testament, we know that Timothy was brought to faith by his mother Eunice and by his grandmother Lois. That faith first dwelt in Lois. His grandmother passed to the mother and passed to Timothy. We know that David gave kindness to Saul. Now, Saul was the king that had a grandson, I don't know how to pronounce his name right offhand, but David wanted to know, is there anybody else that I can show kindness to? And it was his grandson. We see even in the book of Genesis, when Jacob was running away from Laban, Laban caught up with him, and why did you not let me say goodbye to my grandchildren? That is evil. It was evil back then, it is evil today. If you are a son or a daughter and you are keeping your grandparents from seeing your grandchildren, it is evil. It is just completely evil. Job 42 verse 16, it talks about Job, how he lived 140 years after all of his tribulations, and he saw his children and their children to the 4th generation. So it is in the plan of God that grandparents and grandchildren have a very strong relationship with each other. And the Bible does tell us to teach our children on our children's children. And in the case of Job, our children's children, children's children. The children's children are to be a crown to the aged. You talk with grandparents, and what do they have? Do they necessarily have pictures of their children? No, they have pictures of their grandchildren. Grandparents love their grandchildren. Grandparents should be encouraged to have a strong relationship with their grandchildren. And if you're a pastor, and if you have somebody in your church who is forbidding that relationship, it is your responsibility to make sure that they actually do that. So the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and they would in turn tell their children. There's a third reason that we need to also have this grandparent ministry. The new generation of grandparents want significance. They have wisdom and they have resources and they love their families. So churches should have this type of a ministry to equip grandparents to be able to reach their grandchildren. Sometimes grandparents want to do this but don't know how. This is where the church should be coming in and have a ministry for grandparents to help grandparents reach their grandchildren. Number 4 is this: in a world where every culture shift seems to hurt families, this trend makes a way for God's kingdom to flourish through families. See, the plan of God is through the family by and large. We always talk about the church, but the church is made up of families. And in our society today, we have a lot of family fragmentation. We have divorce on demand. We have many broken families. In fact, some people might almost say that there are more broken families than there are intact families. People are not getting married because of the fact that families can be so easily broken. In this generation, we need to have a way that to keep the families intact. And what better way than to have grandparents involved? Well, actually, the better way would be to keep the families intact. But I do know this, that when families do have difficulties, often it's the grandparents who are the anchors. And there was one very famous person who said that, it was because of his mother and his grandparents that he became the person who he was. Whether you like him or not, he was the President of the United States, Barack Obama. It was because of his grandparents that he was able to become, in part, the person that he did. Grandparents should be honored because of their wisdom. In the Bible, it talks about when there's a person with gray hair to stand up in his presence. You are supposed to honor your grandparents. Today, too often, we despise them. And I know this because I've gone to the churches when I've actually asked for help. And instead of saying you're a grandparent, we should be helping you out, often they despise you. And I say this specifically. There was one church here in Dallas, Shoreline City Church. I've gone down there on multiple occasions. They told me that if I came back, I would be arrested. And only because I wanted to see my grandchildren. They told me that they were taking care of my grandchildren. They were the family, and it was a shame that a church that should actually be helping grandparents should be seeking reconciliation, should be telling my daughter, everything that you're saying is wrong. They saw the transcript and everything. You're wrong, and you should repent, and you should not be blocking your father from the grandchildren. He was the one that kept the children from being taken by CPS, and yet the church instead decided, instead of seeing me as a possibility to help strengthen my grandchildren, they chose to take a side that would eliminate me from my grandchildren's lives. By the way, my daughter has now moved out of the area, and this Shoreline City Church, they had a couple of years that they could have done something. Now they're out of the area. Now they can't do anything because she's no longer here, but they really were irresponsible. They failed in their mission. So the other thing is with regarding the grandparent ministry, it's not very difficult to start a grandparenting ministry in the church. If you want to equip grandparents, as you should be wanting to do, it's not that difficult. It's like anything. Just start it. See what happens. There are probably some really great grandparents who would love to take off with it. And there are very great resources out there who have been working on these things to help churches actually have grandparent ministries. The organization is called the Legacy Coalition. You can find them online, Legacy Coalition. And they have been developing resources for grandparents. They've said this is the new wave of ministry. Grandparents being empowered to lead their grandchildren and to teach their grandchildren about the gospel of Jesus Christ, to give them that sense of security, that sense of stability. And as Dr. Roma Hank said, it is my belief that grandparenting is the most important family role of the new century. Whatever the state says, and the state is wrong about grandparents, the state seeks to eliminate grandparents in too many instances. In too many instances, the church has turned a blind eye, like somehow the grandparents are too old, and maybe they just can sit on the bench and they can give us money and they can come and pray or whatever. Grandparents should be equipped to develop, to pour into their grandchildren's lives, and churches should be equipped for this purpose, should help to provide avenues for this to take place. There are books that I will mention here, The Incredible Importance of Grandparenting. This is an article written by Larry Fowler of the Legacy Coalition. Extreme Grandparenting, The Ride of Your Life. This is by Dr. Tim and Darcy Kimmel. We also have Biblical Grandparenting by Dr. Josh Mulvihill. And again, I got to meet Josh a few years ago. Great person, love talking with him. Grandparents, he's not a grandparent, but he knows that grandparents need to be actively involved in their grandchildren's lives. And finally, equipping grandparents, helping your church reach and disciple the next generation. This is by Dr. Josh Mulvihill. He's the editor of it as well. There are many resources. I'll try to put them down in the commentary beneath. But the final thing that we need to talk about is this. Once again, your church, if you are a church member, you need to have a grandparent ministry. And you need to be looking at it this upcoming Sunday, September the 13th, 2020. If you haven't yet, you need to say, grandparents, we honor you. We respect you. And you know what? We are going to help you. If you are a block grandparent, we will help to get you access to your children's lives. If you are an unequipped grandparent, we will help to equip you. If you are a cultural grandparent who's not actually trying to lead the grandchildren to faith, but just playing with them and stuff like that, as important as that is, a grandparent should also be helping to pass on the faith. And if you're a biblical grandparent, we want you to help us to make this better so that all grandparents and all grandchildren can have that vital relationship. It's very, very important. My guess is that many of these people that are destroying society right now in some of these cities probably came from broken families or families that were never formed, and in many instances did not have strong grandparents. You think that grandparents don't matter? Take a look at what's happening in Seattle, in Kenosha, in Portland, and other cities throughout, and you say, where were the grandparents? The grandparents have often been blocked, they have not been facilitated to pour into their grandchildren's lives. Churches, you have a responsibility to do this upcoming Sunday, September the 13th, on Grandparents' Day. I hope that many churches will adopt this ministry perspective and help grandparents to be more effective in the lives of their grandchildren. Thank you.